Oh yeah, everyone's coming in. All right. Everyone's rolling in, so we know that we have started this correctly. And welcome everybody. This is going to be a really fun webinar. I'm so excited. And I already was telling Thomas about this, but happy Platinum Jubilee to all those who celebrate. Had to bring anyone in the UK. It would be that's not too late. Just be evening for you right now. But no, this is really going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited. Thomas, when was the last time we had you on a webinar? Was it like 2 years ago or
I think it was
what is it?
right when the world was exploding
That's what I was
because of COVID.
thinking. Yeah. And we were like, oh, maybe it'll just be a couple months or something.
Yeah,
But maybe the legal expert in you were like, prepare for longer.
always happy to help if I can. So
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So this will be a lot of fun. Oh yeah, look, people. Oh, Danielle, I'm excited for this.
yeah,
Um,
Danielle, Tiffany, I adore both of them. So
that's awesome. Yes.
those of you who have already worked with me, I'll just say a blanket hello. It's great to see you.
Yes,
Anisha,
that's
Anisha Russell's on too. She's awesome. So
oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so you got all your you got a fan club coming in here. I just know it.
yeah,
That's why this
James.
registration was good.
Yeah, I see James here too. This is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, if a lot of these, Tanya, perfect, awesome. So yeah, so many of you. I
So
mean, I'm
fun.
just very grateful to have so much support from the people who've worked with me. So I'm really thankful about that. This is
Yeah,
gonna
it's so awesome.
this is going to be old news for some of you, but for the rest of you, I'm happy to share some info.
Yeah, all the good stuff. And on that, so I'll go ahead and I'll jump in here because yeah, there's a lot to cover, and I know we'll have time for questions. So hopefully, there's so much stuff that everyone's going to take away from this today. That's really, really, really an important topic. But first, just welcome to this webinar hosted by Travefy Academy with my amazing speaker here, which I know many of you already know, but I'll introduce him here in just a minute or so. But if you're new here, though, I'm Stephanie Grice, and I'm a manager of education and marketing coordinator here at Travefy. And I always like to say, before we dive in, for any of you who are new to a Travefy Academy webinar, I always just kind of like to explain what our purpose is and what we're trying to do. Well, first, though, welcome if this is your first Travefy Academy webinar. But really, what we did at Travefy, we designed Travefy Academy to be a free educational resource just to help further, honestly, Travefy's mission just to power the success of travel professionals. So it's really cool. If you go to academy.travefy.com, you'll find webinar replays, articles. We have a podcast. There's all kinds of stuff on there. I've been doing it for a couple, actually, I think it was the end of 2018. And like I said, we've had Thomas on here before. And I think actually you might be our first podcast episode, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Claim to
Did
fame.
we yes, and we didn't even know if it'd be a podcast, and we're like, let's turn this into a podcast. And then now we have the Lounge by Travefy Academy podcast. So definitely check all of that out. And you can also visit our Facebook page to get all up-to-date information on upcoming webinars and all that good stuff. But a couple things to mention too with webinar housekeeping is that this webinar is being recorded. So you will see it on our YouTube channel. Probably just give us like an hour and I'll get it up there right away as quick as I can. Also, academy.travefy.com will get it up there. And then we will have time at the end for questions. So be sure to use that question box because I know the chat, well, you can use the chat too, but sometimes the Q&A area is a little easier for me to see. So as Thomas is going, I will find those questions and hopefully we can get to them all. But if not, we also can hopefully help you out afterwards. But all the fun stuff. But with all that being said, it is time to introduce today's speaker, Thomas Carpenter. So a little bit, I know a lot of you probably already know him. He's popular in the industry. Is Thomas
Overexposed.
yeah. So yeah, so we're having you on. Well, this will explain why. So, attorney in private practice, represent, which this is really cool, representing clients in the arts, entertainment, media, and travel industries with more than 25 years of experience. But Thomas also serves on the advisory board of Uniglobe Travel Center and participates in the International Forum for Travel and Tourism Advocates. And also, not only is also the founder of your own Huckleberry Travel, which is an award winning travel business. So that is why he is all in the industry in different areas. So it's so exciting to have you. And we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today.
Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. I I'm very happy to be here. I am really grateful to everybody who's joined us, and more than happy to share some info for you. So without further ado, should I get started here?
Yeah, I'll let you take it away and share your screen.
Okay, perfect. So uh, there we go.
There we
So
go. I see it.
so this is if you've seen other webinars that I've done, some of this information is going to be a little bit duplicative, but there's also some new. I've kind of tried to drill down on some of these things as well. But what we're going to be talking about today is simple ways to reduce legal risk in your business and how you can use some practical tools to do that. First of all, the states where I'm licensed require me to let you know where you can find me if you need to reach out to me at some point in the future. I'll give this information again at the end of the presentation. But just to get my professional responsibility disclosures out of the way, the Bar Association might view this as attorney advertising, so I'm making that disclosure. This is really intended to be for informational purposes only. I am not intending to provide specific legal advice to you about any particular problem that you're having. By participating in this webinar or viewing the recording, this does not create an attorney-client relationship between your business and my office. And as in life, so it is in law that prior outcomes don't guarantee future results. So just because a court enforced something one time doesn't mean that they're going to do that the next time it crops up. Okay, so a little bit about me. As Stephanie mentioned, I've been practicing law for over 25 years, mostly representing clients in the travel industry right now. Used to work for a couple of major entertainment industry labor organizations. I am licensed in New York and Illinois, as well as several federal courts and the United States Supreme Court. What that means is I can go into court for you in those states, but I represent clients across the country in transactional matters, including drafting documents and policies. And as Stephanie mentioned, in addition to my law practice, I also own a hosted travel agency. And so I do the same things that all of you do in that business. So basically, I've got two full-time jobs, which is not working out so well now that the pandemic is kind of drawing down a little bit. Anyway, if you've seen other webinars I've done, you might have seen a version of this. And I just start off with the premise that selling travel to people is hugely risky. There's just a lot of risk when you sell travel. Our industry is rife with fraud and scams. When you're handling your client's payment information, there are all sorts of security issues that crop up with that. When you're traveling, when your clients are traveling, we've just dealt with the pandemic and quarantines. But before that, terror threats, civil unrest, natural disasters are becoming more and more frequent. And all of those things can really disrupt your client's travel, and that can redound back to you in a way that's negative. Supplier default and bankruptcies, we've seen a few of those lately, partially because of the result of the pandemic, but even before that, that happened from time to time. And travel is also a highly regulated industry. So we have a lot of things that we are required to disclose to people as part of operating a travel agency. So the good news is that with all of those risks, everything that you do in your business that has risk attached to it can be managed or mitigated in some way. So these are not problems that have no solution. You can actually fix these things. And we're going to talk about three of those ways in this call or in this webinar. The first is having a really rock solid terms and conditions document, having a workflow that ensures that you're not missing a step when you're booking travel for clients. And this is the thing that I think is becoming more and more important with every passing day, getting a credit card authorization each time you take a payment and how you take that credit card authorization. Chargebacks are a huge, huge problem post-pandemic. I mean, we're not even post-pandemic yet, but it's already becoming a huge problem. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about all of these things, but especially that. So starting off with the terms and conditions document, I have a very strong view that if you're selling travel, you really do need a solid terms and conditions document that is going to be the boilerplate for every trip that you sell, that is going to be structured as a legal agreement. And because it's a legal agreement, you're going to want your clients to agree to it affirmatively. Not just, if you book a trip with me, it automatically attaches. That doesn't really work legally. We'll talk more about that. And just to beware of cookie cutter terms and conditions documents that are out there. I know that there are services that sell terms and conditions documents. There are things that are kind of floating around the internet as templates, but every business is a little bit different. And if you haven't had an attorney who's representing you that is talking to you about what's in those terms and conditions and making sure that it is fine-tuned to the type of business that you have, my view is that you're doing yourself a disservice. So, somebody who does a lot of school groups is going to need different terms than somebody who does a lot of adventure travel. If you do destination weddings, you might need different terms than somebody who does, a lot of high-end FIT. So every business is a little bit different. Sure, there's a lot of boilerplate that goes in there, but there are also incremental differences when I draft them for people from business to business. So the things that I put into a terms and conditions document generally fall into one of 5 categories. And I'm going to talk in a little more detail about each of these things. So that, first of all, there are legally required disclosures. I mentioned earlier, travel is highly regulated. And so there are some regulatory boxes that you need to check. Provisions that relate to your role as a travel agent versus your role as a travel advisor. So as a travel agent, you are a booking agent for the suppliers that you use. You are the middle person. And so you can't, violate a supplier's pricing guidelines, those types of things. You have a duty to the supplier. But as the travel advisor, you also owe a duty of care to your clients. So being in that middle position between the supplier and the client has all sorts of risk attached to it. It's a complicated place to be. Your clients might not understand it. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Advisories to clients, because you have a duty of care to your clients, courts have held that there are certain advisories that you're supposed to be making. You can take care of those in a terms and conditions document. Disclaimers of liability or responsibility, that is the big one, and we'll spend some time talking about that. And of course, force majeure provisions, or the so-called act of God language. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. Okay, so let's start with the legally required disclosures. A lot of these things, you can put them in your terms and conditions documents. So your seller of travel registration disclosures, you can put that in, or if you're hosted, your host agency's seller of travel registrations. If you're selling airline tickets, the Department of Transportation requires you to make the hazardous materials advisory and insecticide notices. And you're also required to tell people that airline e-tickets have an expiration date. Those are examples of things that the government is telling us that we have to disclose to clients. And you can put those in your terms and conditions document, and it just eliminates any question about whether or not you're complying with the regulations. There are some other things that you need to do, either because they're legally required by the government or because courts have held that you're required to make these disclosures. And you can't necessarily, you're not always able to make those disclosures as part of the terms and conditions. For example, the supplier identity. Courts have held that you're not allowed, that you have to disclose who your suppliers are. And I know a lot of newer agents, you don't want your clients shopping around. I understand why that's a concern, but disclosing who the supplier is a legal duty that you have. Advertising disclosure policies. If your website has a blog, the Federal Trade Commission needs you to disclose certain things if you're monetizing your blog, or if you're using like an affiliate program where you're getting kickbacks if people purchase a foreign language course through your website, stuff like that. Those you're going to have to handle in other communications. So going back to this thing about disclosing the supplier identity, because it is really, really important. There's a way to do that in Travefy. And, I'm not, as Stephanie mentioned, this is this is not intended to be an advertisement for Travefy, but I'm assuming that because so many of you are on this webinar and it's being sponsored by Travefy Academy, I'm assuming many of you probably do use Travefy. So in this, when you're building an itinerary on Travefy, there's a place where you can disclose booked through HE Travel, which is what I've done here. HE Travel is a tour operator, and you can disclose that that is disclose that as part of the itinerary. You don't have to be in your face about it, but you're meeting your legal obligation that way. So going back to the terms and conditions document, I talked a little bit about being a booking agent versus being a travel advisor. So your client, in your terms and conditions document, your client can agree that they understand, whether it's intuitive to them or not. I've had clients in my travel business say, when I paid you for that trip, and I have to say, wait a minute, you didn't pay me for the trip. You gave me your credit card number and I made the payment with the supplier. Different thing. I'm the booking agent. So clients might not understand that, especially if they're new to working with travel advisors, but they can agree that they understand that in your terms and conditions document. So that's kind of foundational. I put that in the very first introductory paragraph when I draft these for people. Also provisions that they understand that in addition to your terms and conditions, that supplier terms and conditions are going to apply to their booking. That's critically important. And that they understand that payment terms are set by the supplier, and that once they put money down on a trip, they might not be entitled to a refund. So those things can go into a terms and conditions document to clarify what your role is. Advisories to clients. I mentioned earlier, there are court cases all over the place that hold that you have a duty of care to your clients to advise them of things that are important to their trip. So you can make those advisories in the terms and conditions document. And really what that is intended to do is shift the responsibility from you to the client. So, you can't take the trip for them, but you also can't get caught in the weeds of like, you have to know this, you have to know that. And they're like, yeah, I know that. Put it in your terms and conditions. They're agreeing to it automatically. So what are some of those things? Courts have held that you are obligated to tell your clients that they need passports, visas, travel documents in order to travel. You shouldn't have to tell a client that they need a passport to travel internationally. And yet one of my clients had a traveler show up at the airport without a passport. And what do you mean I need a passport to go to Europe? So my travel advisor never said anything about that. So if you put that into your terms and conditions, you're checking that box, and it's very easy for you to say, maybe you didn't read my terms, but it was in there. That they need to other things like that they should make sure that the correct information is on their reservation, so that you don't get that call on the way to the airport about, I just looked at this and my name's misspelled, and you're like, why didn't you tell me 6 months ago when we could have fixed it? Permission for minors to travel, restrictions on entry. If somebody has a DUI on their record and they can't get into Canada, put that into your terms and conditions. Vaccinations and health screenings, that it's their responsibility to take care of those things if it's required for their trip. And then risks of travel. Travel is always risky. If you had clients who were booked in Russia and then the war in the Ukraine breaks out, obviously you can't tell your clients whether or not it's safe to travel to Russia, but you can put it in your terms and conditions that it's their responsibility to do the research, figure out whether they're comfortable taking the trip and making that decision on their own. So all of these things, again, are about shifting the responsibility so that the client is taking care of those things. Okay, so disclaimer of responsibility and limitations on liability. These are, I say this when I go over terms documents with people that I've drafted them for. This is the most important provision that's going to be in your document, because this is where your clients are agreeing that because you are the booking agent and not the supplier, that you are not responsible for anything that your supplier does or fails to do that leads to damages or injury or loss or anything like that. So that can be, there's a whole range of things that could be. That could be something like you book your clients at a resort, there's seaweed on the beach, it smells horrible, your clients blame you because you put them at that resort. Well, it is not your job to clean up the seaweed on the beach, no matter what your client thinks. And so you can have a provision in your terms document that they understand that they can't come after you for that. Or the helicopter that's going to land on the glacier was not maintained properly. There's a horrible accident. Your client is injured, comes back and files a big lawsuit. That's not your responsibility either. So all of these things that are within your supplier's control, not your control, you can have them agree that you're not responsible for that. And even extending to policies that your clients don't like. So if your supplier has a no refunds policy, that's an example of something that you can have them agree that you're not responsible for booking them with the supplier that has that policy. And even if suppliers go bankrupt and fail to deliver the services entirely, you can have a disclaimer of responsibility clause that says you're not responsible for those supplier bankruptcies. Of course, you're only going to book with suppliers that are reputable, that have you have reason to believe are going to be in good financial health. But some of those supplier bankruptcies that cropped up during the pandemic and even before that were kind of unexpected. I think a lot of us didn't expect that some of those companies were going to go under, and they did. And so that you can disclaim responsibility for that. Limitation on liability is something that's a little bit different. That would provide that even if your clients do figure out a way to drag you into a lawsuit, that the damages are going to be capped because you're the booking agent, right? You're not the supplier. So you can put a provision in there that says, even if you do sue me, the most you can get out of me is the commission that I made on a trip and any fees that I charged. So if you made $500 in commission and you charged a $200 fee, they try to sue you for $30 million. They have already agreed that the most they could get out of you under any circumstances is $700. So that's a huge, I'm trying to find that should be peace of mind for you if you've got a provision like that in your terms. Force majeure. So the last category of terms and conditions documents, force majeure events are events that are unforeseen, unpredictable, and outside of anybody's control. So that could be fires, floods, pandemics, terror attacks, natural disasters, civil unrest, national strikes. All of those things are considered force majeure events. And so if you can't do something that you're supposed to do because of force majeure, your force majeure clause is the language that takes you off the hook. So if you live in South Florida and there's a hurricane that's coming and you have to evacuate and your condo is damaged and you don't have an internet connection and you miss a bunch of payment deadlines, that hurricane is a force majeure event. And your force majeure clause says that you're not responsible for missing those payment deadlines just because you sold, just because of the hurricane, because the hurricane the hurricane was a force majeure event. And then in addition to that, you can also put in your terms that your suppliers are going to have their own force majeure policies. And that could be the reason that a trip gets canceled or postponed because the hotel burned down or the volcano erupted and the planes couldn't take off from Iceland. If those things happen and a trip gets postponed and canceled, you can have language that says, you'll do your best to try to get reimbursement for a client, but it's really going to be according to whatever the supplier policy says. Okay, so that's terms and conditions documents. Workflow is the thing that goes hand in hand with that, because it doesn't do you any good to have doesn't do you any good to have really good terms and conditions if your clients aren't actually agreeing to them in some way, shape, or form. And I have a strong view that you don't want to be difficult to work with. You don't want to be constantly rubbing your client's nose and 7 or 8 pages of legal stuff. And so if you are working with your clients, you want to make it really easy for them to agree to your terms and conditions without having them running, screaming in the other direction. Other parts of your workflow that are important, you want to make sure that you're giving them complete and accurate information about all the bookings, that you're sending insurance quotes regularly, and most importantly, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, that you're securing a credit card authorization for each and every payment that you take. So this is what I do in my travel business, and it seems to work for other people. So I recommend that you put your terms and conditions document, all the legal stuff, on an unlinked page of your website. So you can put it on a public facing page, but maybe it's a good idea if you don't link it to everything, because a lot of times people are going to go to your website to see what you're all about, to figure out whether they want to pick up the phone and call you. And I would just rather not have a client stumble across 8 pages of legal stuff and have that be the reason that they decide not to pick up the phone, right? So um, some people who are not all that tech savvy might not know how to do this. If you have a website that's through Travefy, I know that you can publish a page that's not linked to the as part of your Travefy website, and Stephanie might be able to talk about that a little bit later when we get into Q&A, if that applies to anybody. But basically, if it's on an unpublished page, but you've got a URL that you can send to them, you can just send them that web address for where they can find your terms and conditions. They can agree to that rather than having to agree to the full 8 pages that you're kind of sticking it under their nose and asking them to read it and all that stuff. So what I recommend you do is, rather than sending them the 8 to 10 pages of legal stuff, that you use what lawyers call a click wrap agreement, which is basically, think about when you download software and that box pops up and it says, click here that I agree. You've got a million contracts with Bill Gates right now that you don't even know about. You can do the same thing. So basically, you send them a form that you can build online. If you're using Travefy, you can build a form through Travefy. If you're using something else, lots of form building technologies would allow you to do this. But they just check a box that they're hiring you to plan your trip, and that they agree to the terms and conditions of booking, which are located at, and then you give them the link to the website where your terms and conditions are living. So, whether they click through and read those terms is their responsibility, but it is legally sufficient for them to check a box and return a form to you. I really do feel like having a solid tech tool in this regard is really important for you. There are lots of tools out there. This is a Travefy webinar, but I know lots of people out there are using other products: TravelJoy, Dubsado, Vacation CRM. There are other things out there. Some people are even using free tools. But if you can find something that's going to give you the ability to create customized forms, to transmit credit card numbers securely, that has some sort of e-signature function, and something that allows you to keep track of when your client submits forms and signs documents. And so having a good tech tool that'll do all of this for you really can streamline your workflow. It makes it easy for you to follow the same steps every time you're booking a trip for a client. Makes it easy for your clients to do business with you, because you're not constantly saying, okay, print this off and then sign it and then scan it and send it back to me. The technology is your friend, and so make good use of it, and consider it a cost of doing business. Investing in the right tech tools can really help you. And then the last main thing that we wanted to talk about is credit card authorizations. I mentioned at the top of this call that credit card authorizations are absolutely important, and I think it's critical for you to get a credit card authorization each and every time that you process a transaction. So deposit, final payment, adding supplemental services, get an authorization for each of those things that shows what the date is that they've authorized it, the amount that they're authorizing you to put on their card, and the supplier product that's being booked. I do not recommend that you take numbers by email or especially not text. And I even avoid taking them over the phone, because that is not secure and encrypted. I don't recommend that you allow your clients to say, oh, just hit my card that you've got on file. You don't have a record if there's a dispute about that charge. And definitely do not store numbers in an unencrypted system. So if you get hacked and that spreadsheet that you have with all your clients' credit card information gets out there, the liability for a data breach like that is really, really serious. So use a tool that is secure and encrypted. There is an important thing that you should know about credit card authorizations. During the pandemic, and this kind of happened in the middle of the night, credit card companies changed the standard for how they resolve chargeback disputes, and they're now requiring not only that the client agreed to your terms and conditions, but also that those terms and conditions include a cancellation and refund policy. And the new thing that they imposed is that now you are required to show them, in order to defend a chargeback, that the cancellation and refund policy was brought to the client's attention at the time the charge was authorized. And that's the thing that a lot of tour operators weren't doing. And that's why a lot of tour operators lost a lot of chargebacks. But for you, if you're doing that, that helps out your supplier. If you're getting an authorization to run a charge with the supplier, if you are charging fees directly, that helps you defend against the chargeback. So, here's an example of credit card authorization that you might use. I'm authorizing the name of the agency to charge my card in the amount indicated, and agree to the terms and conditions of booking, including the applicable cancellation and refund policies, which are located at this link. So again, you can link to your terms and conditions, and basically when they agree to authorize a charge, they're agreeing to it when they make a deposit, when they make a final payment. They're agreeing to your terms and conditions over and over and over again. And they're also, because you're using a really good tech tool, you're also getting a record that they have authorized that charge for that amount, and that they're and the date that they did that. So if a supplier comes after you, you've got a record that'll protect you. I think I'm just going to philosophize for a half a minute about this. So I think, the good thing about the way suppliers handled the pandemic is that so many of our suppliers were really flexible and generous with their cancellation and refund policies, and waiving those penalties, and granting refunds when they might not have been required to do that. That was great, but the byproduct of that is that a lot of travelers right now think that they don't have to pay for their vacations if they change their mind, or if they want to cancel at the last minute. And so they probably don't realize, a lot of them I think think that if they call their credit card company and say, I want to dispute that charge, they might not be realizing that since you were the one who used their card to make the payment with the supplier, they're basically accusing you of credit card fraud. And there are scenarios where the amount of that disputed charge could come out of your pocket. So I always put language in terms and conditions documents that deals with this, that where the client agrees that they're not going to dispute the charge unless it's fraudulent, and that they're going to take responsibility for the bookings they make with you. But in addition to that, you're really going to want to have a really good credit card authorization to protect you. And then just one little thing to make, one little point to make, both about terms and conditions documents as well as credit card authorizations. Checking a box is sufficient to create an agreement. So there's no magic to wet ink on paper. You just need a record of when and how your client agreed to your terms. Whether they go to your website and read the terms is their responsibility, but when they check that box, you've got a binding contract that you can enforce in a court if you need to. The one difference is if you're waiving legal rights, that is a different thing. So you can't waive legal rights by just checking a box. So if it's something like you want them to agree, like I never put a photo authorization in a in a terms and conditions document, because there's this thing called right of publicity. People have the right to not have their images used in advertising. And so if you were going to have them agree in advance that you can use their picture on your website, that's a legal right. They're going to have to sign something for that. COVID waivers, I put a lot of provisions in the terms and conditions about COVID, but it's not specifically structured as a waiver. Those things would need signatures. So, but for things that go into a terms and conditions document, you're going to be okay with just a checkbox. So just the key takeaways here, start with a strong terms and conditions document. That's going to protect you across the board. The few things that a TNC document won't cover you for, hopefully you will also have errors and omissions insurance, and that'll cover you for everything else. So between those two things, you're pretty much covered across the board. Have a really good solid workflow and good scripts so that, and by script, I mean when you're talking to a client about how you work with them, make sure that you've got the pattern down so that you're describing things accurately. Make sure you get a credit card authorization for each and every charge that you take, and use the right tech tools. Make the investment. It's a cost of doing business. Use the right tech tools to help protect you. So that is the whole kit and caboodle. So
Love it.
yeah, so I don't know. I'm sure there are. I see that there are
Tons.
questions. So, and I know Stephanie, you've been looking at that. So I'm gonna stop talking for a minute and see what questions we have.
Oh, yes, there are tons. Well, first of all, thank you. That was so informative, so eye-opening, just all the different things, and it's like legal stuff can seem like it's scary, but it's not. You just have to have the right put your best foot forward, and having all that. So that was awesome. But okay, so we have tons of questions, and I highly doubt we're going to be able to get to every one of them. So apologies in advance, but we're going to try our best. So okay, so the first one is, so this is a really good question from Christopher is, how would one find an attorney that specializes in travel in different jurisdictions? So like he's in Washington D.C. and but he doesn't know. Like, so how would you find, especially like in your state and stuff? How do you find them?
So I mean, there are only like about I'm going to say like 7 or 8 attorneys across the country who specialize in travel and tourism law and represent small businesses in the travel and tourism industry. We all know each other. We're all part of this organization called the International Forum for Travel and Tourism Advocates. We talk to each other all the time. If we have a conflict, we refer people to each other. In terms of state law, for what we're talking about here, terms and conditions, documents and policies, if we're drafting those things, that does not require us to go into state court for you. And so I have clients in, I think, almost every state of the country, maybe not Alaska. So if anybody in Alaska wants to hire me, let me know.
Yeah, anyone on Alaska here?
Yeah,
It's your
but
chance.
but in terms of the state law things, I can't go into court for you, but also I'm not a litigator. I don't litigate cases for the most part. I'm not really set up for that. I'm a small solo practice. But if there is something that you need me to do, or you need an attorney to do, one of the professional obligations that attorneys have, we're not allowed to take on cases that we're not qualified to handle. And because the travel and tourism industry is so distinct and has so many unique things, I would recommend that you work with an attorney that actually understands the industry. I'm a huge supporter of ASTA. ASTA has an attorney referral program. I'm one of the attorneys there, but there are others. So if I rub you the wrong way, you can hire one of those other attorneys for sure. But for documents and policies, we can work with people in other states.
That is impossible for you to rub someone the wrong way. Okay, the best.
I've got a short list of people who might with that. But.
Nah. That's all right. Well, okay. So this was a really good question too. Is someone had asked if you created terms and conditions 2 years ago, how often do you recommend that you or as the lawyer that you need to get that reviewed and updated? Like how often should that be looked at?
Yeah. So I mean, it just depends. Obviously, with COVID, a lot of things changed. I changed the boilerplate language I was using on a couple of points because of COVID. From time to time, I kind of review when I draft terms and conditions documents for people. I do it on a flat rate because it keeps the cost down. I try to keep this question comes up all the time, so I'm just going to put it out there. I try to keep the cost right around the range of one good solid mid-range booking, so that it's not breaking the bank. So it's not thousands of dollars, it's more like hundreds of dollars. I do it on a flat rate. I also include talking through the workflow depending on what tech tools you're using. I provide counseling on the workflow. I draft terms on a custom basis for people, but then I also include as part of the flat rate, if there's ever a change in the industry that leads me to update my language on a particular point, I go through my client list and see who are the companies that have the language on that thing. There's a new regulation that got passed on this. and then I send around updated language, and I don't send an invoice for those updates. That's all just part of keeping it current. Um, and ideally it doesn't happen all that often, because you want your terms to be stable and consistent. You don't want to be constantly changing your terms and conditions. So I think, like with COVID, I definitely changed a few things. I've tinkered with my language since then, but nothing that's really substantive. But my clients get an email if there's anything. When the credit card authorization standards, I sent out an email about that. My clients don't hear from me all that often, but if there's ever a question, they can always call me. So
Yeah, that's cool. And it kind of a little bit similar of a question to that is, well, this person was you were talking about providing like a link of the terms and conditions and like having that on your website somewhere. But they're like, is there a liability in an instance where your terms and conditions may be updated? And not being able to see which version the client accepted. So basically, like if the client accepted or signed your terms and conditions and then a month later you change things, like how would that work per se?
well, I think one of the reasons that's one of the reasons why it's good to include the credit card authorization, include agreeing to your terms and conditions as part of the credit card authorization, because that way, like if a client reaches out to you about a trip and they've worked with you before, you've already got their information. You're not going to send them a new client info form or a client agreement, but they can agree to your terms and the new version of your terms and conditions when they make the deposit on the next trip, that sort of thing. But also I put language in the terms and conditions that gives you the right to update your terms and conditions as you see fit, and your clients are agreeing that you have that right. So that's a provision that helps with that.
Awesome, cool. And another question that we got was, will can we get a copy of those slides?
Well, yeah, I think this is going to be recorded. So
Yes,
so
and so
the
you can
recording,
pause, take screenshots.
yeah, absolutely. The recording will be available. But if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to. I guess the other thing I should have said too, and I see there that in the chat box somebody was asking about reviewing a terms and conditions document. I'm more than happy to set up a complimentary consultation with anybody who would like to. I do those complimentary consultations as part of the ASTA referral program, but even if you're not an ASTA member, I always do a complimentary consult for people. And the best way to get on my calendar for that would be to reach out to my practice manager, Colleen McHugh, and I'm just going to type her, I'll type her address into the chat box, but basically Colleen, her email is McHugh, CMCHUGH @carpentertaylor.com. And I'm going to be traveling a little bit next week, so my response times might be a little slower than usual. But Colleen can get you the information so that I've got your contact info, and you can get on my calendar to talk to me. But more than happy to chat to people. And if you've got a terms document that you're already using, I mean, you don't need. I mean, look, I run a small business too. You don't need to spend money to fix something that's not broken. So if you're good to go, I will absolutely tell you that. I joke that you can always find an attorney who is willing to take your money, but I'm not that kind of guy. So I'm just going to type this here.
That's awesome. And while you're typing that, I'll mention too. So one thing that's really awesome is with Travefy. So I'm gonna actually share my screen because again, with Travefy Academy, you don't really talk about Travefy as a product, but this just makes a lot of sense. So I actually ended up pulling up my Travefy account here. And because there are a lot of questions that we'll be able to answer with a real live attorney, which is so cool that we can literally show you how this works and answer those questions. But the first one was, is there a way? So Christopher had asked, is there a way to have somebody agree to terms and conditions via Travefy? And yes, there is. So there's a couple different ways to do this, and this will answer multiple questions with this. Is you can create forms in Travefy, and that's where all of this lives. So you can do that by going into your library. So again, if you've never really seen Travefy, we have tons of videos. So go to travefy.com/support that will walk you through all of this. But basically, you can set up a form. So you just say new item and then form. And It doesn't have to be legal. You could literally just be collecting, new traveler inquiry questions. But we do have the option where you can have a card authorization or e-signature in here. So you can use this of two different ways where you can have them both, where you have your terms and conditions in there. Or if you just want this to be for terms and conditions, you can use it that way as well. But a couple things about this, which Thomas can help explain the importance of this is all PCI compliant. So I know that there was a question like, what are the legal ramifications of getting, storing CVV codes from credit cards? So a couple things about that is that this is PCI compliant. This also isn't stored forever. So when you create, that's what makes this really nice and safe and secure is when you're in here, you don't even have to collect the CVV if you don't need that. But when you go through this process before you send this to anybody, let's see if let me go in here. So I haven't put a title on it, but you can see it's really faint in here. But you have to put the authorization description and the authorization amount and also the deadline. So this will not live in your account forever. So you only have a certain amount of time in that. And so someone had asked, like, how long does a submitted form remain in Travefy? Well, you'll always see it that they submitted the form, but you won't be able to get the credit card number anymore once that authorization or once that deadline has passed. So that's what's really cool about that.
And other
Yeah.
products do the same thing. I mean, the rule, in order to be PCI compliant, one of the things is that you're not required, you are required to not store the CVC with the other information about the document. So like, I don't know if people are using client base, for example, it doesn't allow you to store the CVC code in there. There's not even a field for it. I know TravelJoy does the same thing that Travefy does, where they'll delete the CVC code after a period of time. So things that are not secure tools that are not PCI compliant, avoid using those for storing credit card numbers.
Yeah. And so, so just wanted to kind of show how that works in there. The other thing too is that we require that electronic signature, and you can use that to, instead of, if you don't want card information, you just want to do like a terms and conditions or waiver thing, you can do that. But you can also add like you can choose what type of questions. So if you need to do like yes, I accept this, or no type of a thing. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do in there. So just wanted to show that in there. But again, go to travefy.com/support, or we can do a free, a demo training walkthrough of how all of that works. But so I know there's a lot in that. But okay, so let me jump back in here to my questions here. Okay, so Don asked, and it's kind of in the same thing. So we were just showing what you can do on Travefy, and again, there's software tools, out there that you can do this. But Don had asked, I have a Word document I send to clients for my clients to sign. So is that okay? Can you use something like just a Word document?
Sure. I mean, it's just a question of, if you're getting, like if you're sending them a Word document and they're signing it and scanning it and sending it back to you, that's legit. Again, I think, the goal is to be easy to work with. And so for me, it's just a question of how clunky it is. There are lots of ways to do it that are perfectly acceptable, as long as they are affirmatively agreeing to your terms and conditions. You can I use a client agreement as a vehicle to have my clients agree to my terms. So in my terms live on my website. I just have a couple of user-friendly paragraphs that thanks for reaching out to me about your trip. I'm excited to work with you. They check a box on my form. I am agreeing to your terms, and I'm hiring you to plan my trip, and I agree to your terms, which are located at www. wherever it is. And then they hit that form back, comes back into my system, I store it, and I'm good to go. So
Awesome. And Denise also asked, there's actually a couple questions that were very similar to this is, do travelers need to agree to terms and conditions before they put a deposit on their trip, or when you are quoting a trip for them? So what would be like the best time for that process to happen?
well, that's one of the reasons that I use a client agreement. So I have them agree to my terms right after I hang up the phone for my intake call. And the reason is because there are things that I put into terms and conditions, my terms and conditions, like the right to correct a quote. So like if they're not agreeing to my terms and conditions until they're making a deposit, well, obviously I've already sent them a quote. If I made a mistake in a quote, quoted the wrong date, quoted the wrong price, quoted a supplier promotion that expired, then, like, I mean, I can still refuse to sell them the trip at the mistake price that I quoted, but I'd rather have something in my terms and conditions that they've agreed to that says they understand that they can't demand that I sell them a $12,000 trip for $1,200 if I left off a digit, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's a good idea to do it as early in the process as you can, and that's one of the reasons that I use a client agreement at the front end of the relationship,
Yeah.
and then back it up with the credit card authorizations when they make the deposit final payment.
Well, and that's what I keep thinking too, as on the outside, not being a travel agent or advisor, and I feel like being a client would be you're showing them how safe and secure you are by having all of these things and the credit card authorization. Because so this actually goes into the next question that Cindy had asked: what is the best practice for a client that refuses to submit online credit card payments? So what do you do in that case?
I don't work with those clients because there's just too much risk attached to it. If somebody like I had a client just last week in my travel business just last week who said um, let me send you an email with my credit card information and then I'll send you the CVC code by text. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I'm going to send you a secure link to transmit the number to me, but please do not do that, because it's not, I mean, it's going to hurt them as much as it's going to hurt you if something goes sideways or somebody intercepts that message or they text it to the wrong person. I would just say I'm really sorry, but I can't work with you if that's the only option for you.
Mhm. And I still just really feel like if you're saying I legally cannot do that, like I am that safe and secure working with me. So I feel like, but I guess you'll probably still get those type of people every once in a while. But there's another question here that I'm actually don't know the answer and I'm very curious about. It has to do with Travefy also. But Melanie had asked, what if you had terms and conditions to your Travefy proposal and they accept the Travefy proposal? Is that acceptable? And I can show you too. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the proposal process, but basically, when you create, here, I can share this here. Uh, when you create a trip, okay, we'll say this proposal right here. Let's say you put like the terms and conditions in your information document section or something. Well, when someone approves this proposal, they are, putting their name and email, and then they're approving it. Would that count as approving terms and conditions or no?
I'm looking at so I use proposals, but I also use another tech tool hand in hand with Travefy.
Mhm.
So I do it a
Yeah,
little
it's hard to
differently. But by entering your name and selecting approve, you approve the proposal. Blah blah blah. I mean, I would want to make
yeah,
sure that there was language in there that said that they also included that they're
the
also
terms and
including the
conditions.
terms and conditions. Um,
So you
but
could change that in here.
Yeah, I mean,
So I
yeah,
wonder if that would
okay.
work.
So perfect. Yeah,
Mhm.
you can use custom terms on proposals and basically, edit that language to say specifically that I am approving the terms and conditions of booking, which are linked to in the information and documents section on my proposal, something like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I never thought about that. It was a really good question. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about that there."
Yeah, and again, because I use a couple of different tech tools hand in hand, I actually don't use Travefy for that particular thing, but I know Travefy has the capacity.
Yeah, you could do it though. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so another question here. Is this one was really interesting too, and we might already know the answer to it based on the previous question. But someone had asked, can we record a Zoom conversation of them authorizing us to take their credit card? So if you did it over like the phone or something, I mean, you have, but is that still probably like not not
I
the
mean,
best?
yeah, I mean, I think you could, but I mean, here's how that's going to play out. Like, if you need to produce a credit card authorization, I mean, if you're taking direct payments from people, if you're taking direct payments for people, just know that that kind of almost puts you into the tour operator category, and your E&O insurance might view you as a tour operator. So just keep that in mind. But if you're like taking net rates and marking it up and you're processing the charge through a merchant account, um, that is riskier, and so I would not recommend doing that. But if you're using their payment information to pay the supplier directly, the supplier is going to want to see something that shows the amount of the charge, shows the date it was authorized, and agrees that they're going to be accepting that. And then that additional language that I put in there about, agreeing to the terms and conditions at the same time and calling it to their attention. I think that's going to be something that's going to fall a little bit short of what you might need. Um, and keep in mind that because, if a supplier comes after you for a disputed charge, you're going to have to produce the document showing you had the authorization to use the card. And if that document is a Zoom video that you've stored on your hard drive, it's a little bit harder to transmit that to somebody. I don't know whether the supplier would accept that as valid. So I mean, I know some people just don't like to use computers, and maybe you've got elderly clients who are not tech savvy. Oh, I shouldn't say that, because there are lots of elderly people who are perfectly tech savvy. But if you've got a client that's not tech savvy, that is going to come into your office, if you've got a brick and mortar, and sit down with you and wants to sign it wet ink on paper, you can print out the form and do it that way. But then at least you've got something that you can easily forward to the supplier if there's a question.
Yeah. Or just the clients who like don't trust what it is. And you're like, well, it is. And so this is actually another one. So this is from Deidre's. Could you mail client an authorization form? Because I've paid bills like with the pay on paper. So what's the difference with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you email a form to them and they are writing out their credit card number and signing the authorization wet ink on paper and sending it to you, I mean, the risk in that case is, what if somebody gets their hands on that piece of paper and it doesn't make
Hmm.
it to you, right? So then that's one of the reasons that I like the idea of using a technology to do that. But I mean, it's valid if you've got something that shows the date, the amount of the charge, and that they were authorizing it, and who the supplier was, then I think you should be good to go.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's really interesting because it's like before internet, what was this? But nice thing is we have all the tools out there. It's really good, really great stuff out there. Another question here that I thought was really interesting. I never thought about this, but does force majeure cover COVID liability?
It did when COVID was unforeseen and unpredictable.
Oh,
Now,
okay.
now that we've been dealing with COVID for a while, it's no longer, and insurance companies are kind of treating it this way, and suppliers as well. They're no longer treating it as unforeseen and unpredictable. It's definitely outside of your control, but force majeure is anything that's unforeseen, unpredictable, outside of your control. So after we've been living with it for a while, it kind of takes it out of force majeure. But even though the pandemic is not a force majeure, it's possible that a quarantine that's associated with the pandemic could be unforeseen and unpredictable. So, like, we had a client who was traveling on a river cruise, and suddenly Holland changed their. We're supposed to call them the Netherlands now. Netherlands changed their entry protocol, saying that you had to quarantine for 10 days, and we had the person going in the day before,
Oh.
and so we had to like move heaven and earth to get them onto the ship right from the airport so that they could sail out of the country, so that they didn't have to quarantine for 10 days. And so that sort of last minute change in terms of a quarantine requirement, that would be unforeseen, unpredictable, and outside of your control. So that would be force majeure. But things like fires, floods, hurricanes, things like that. I mean, even if you're in a hurricane zone, the hurricane itself is considered to be unpredictable. So
Yeah. That's really good to know though, because that's the scary thing is that just if the country just decides to, they have a big outbreak and they take extreme measures for it and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know, like we know COVID is a thing, but we didn't know that would happen." So, that's good to know.
mhm.
And oh man, there's so much we could keep going. Oh my gosh. And there's so many questions. And again, I just want to say I'm so sorry everyone that I can't get to all of them. But definitely I have Thomas's website and everything listed on academy.travefy.com. And that's also where I'll put this recording. And then that way, you can watch. And I would recommend just screenshot. I know there's so many good slides on there that people are gonna be like, pause, Screenshot, gotta get that. That was great. I mean, so much great expertise. So I just want to thank you so much again, Thomas, for joining us today. This is really awesome and spending the hour with us, teaching us so many things.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And I put Colleen's email in the chat.
Mhm.
My email was on one of the earlier slides. You can also email me directly, but like I said, since I'm traveling next week, I'm going to be a little bit slower. But by all means, don't hesitate to reach out if you've got questions. Always happy to set up a complimentary consult and talk through whatever the issues are. I saw some questions about LLCs and things like that. I'll always
Yeah.
happy to chat with you about that in a complimentary consult. Just feel free to reach out.
Yeah, lots of those and like payment questions. And well, my last question for you actually is where are you traveling to? Where are you headed next?
I am going to be visiting my Uniglobe family
Oh, yes.
in Arizona. So
Yeah.
very excited. So cheers to all my Uniglobe peeps.
Yeah, and we'll have I will not be able to go, but Doug from our team is going. So find Travefy while you're there, if you're there
I
as well.
I Doug is crushingly awesome, so I will absolutely be
Yes.
chatting with him. So,
That's so awesome. Well, safe travels there. Have fun. And thank you so much, everyone, again for joining us. This has been really great. Tons of awesome stuff to learn. But enjoy the rest of your day.
my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.